All right. We've got a lot of people here today. That's wonderful. All right. Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Katie Bradford Osborne. I'm the founder and curator of Roaring Artist Gallery. We're a fully virtual art gallery that exhibits exclusively the work of women identifying and non-binary artists. And we're here today for Artist Talk number 2 in our series for our Audacity exhibition. And I'm so excited. I absolutely love these artist talks, and I love these artists who are here with us today. I think this is going to be a really exciting artist talk. So I will get started with introducing our artists. I'm still letting people in from the, I'm seeing a little distracted. But we're going to start with Athena Cooper, and then we have Alisa McRonald and Jill Nicole Luton, and I will start with Athena. I'm going to read your bio, and then I'll hand it over to you. All right. Okay. Athena Cooper is a visual artist and therapeutic arts practitioner based in Calgary, Canada. Self-taught as an acrylic painter, her artwork is strongly influenced by her love of the vibrant colors and interplay of light found in stained glass. Born with the rare genetic disorder, osteogenesis imperfecta, aka brittle bone disease, and a wheelchair user since the age of 6, the images Athena creates appear as though they have been passed through her own glass-like nature to become windows into how she sees the world. Through her paintings, Athena highlights the ways that a disabled life is different, but also incredibly ordinary. Whether it's challenging the asexual perception of people with disabilities by highlighting the interabled relationship with her husband, or depicting her wheelchair as a neutral emotional charge, more typical of a piece of furniture, these are all ways that she seeks to shift the narrative away from the exceptional nature of disability to a more normative, inclusive viewpoint. I think that's a wonderful bio, and I am so excited to hear what you have to say, Athena. I'm going to hand it right over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Katie, for inviting me to be part of this. And I really appreciate the work that the Roaring Artist Gallery does. And yeah, let me just share my screen here. So I was really interested in this particular call for artists because it was all about being a self-taught artist, and that has been a really interesting part of my journey, just because I've had such a very meandering path as an artist. I actually started out in early 2000s as an animator. I went to animation school. I really wanted to work for a place like Pixar or Disney. And this was a time when, Monsters Inc. was out, and Finding Nemo and Shrek. And I just really wanted to be part of that world. So this was my character, Sir Stumpy, from my demo reel. And I was all set to go. And then, unfortunately, in the second to last semester of my classes, I was hit by a car at a crosswalk. And that really disrupted everything. With my condition, I've had about 40 broken bones over the course of my life, and most of them happened pre-puberty. But this one, I thought, okay, well, it's just another fracture. I'll get over it. I'll recover. And I was on about a month and a half of being flat on my back and bed rest. And it was just a very, very difficult recovery for me. And once I came out of that, I found that my creative drive and my trauma had somehow gotten entangled in themselves. And so I set about to try to finish my demo reel and to work on, everything that I thought I wanted for my career. And I couldn't sit down to animate. I was having kinds of anxiety issues, and eventually I just kind of called it quits. And I had been paying for animation school by doing web development and web design. And so I went off and I was a web developer for a while. And I kept trying to get back to doing creative things. And I would start and stop and start and stop. It was like this engine that just didn't want to turn over. And so I would draw a bit and I would try to animate and all these things. And it was not until about almost 10 years later, so in 2012, I was reading this book by Martha Beck called Steering by Starlight. And she was saying how you should pay attention to the things that you're drawn to. And I had noticed at that point that I was pinning all these Pinterest pins of Tiffany stained glass. And so I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. What is it about stained glass that I am drawn to? And I was still dealing with my creativity demons. Like anytime I tried to sit down and do something, I got caught up in like, what's it for? Is this for my demo reel? Is this for a portfolio? All this kind of stuff. And so I was very much like, okay, this stained glass stuff, it's just for me. I'm just playing. It's just exploratory. I'm not going to worry about where it's going to lead. And so I began doing studies of Tiffany stained glass lamps and windows. So this is a piece of a Tiffany window that it was in the Chicago Stained Glass Museum before it was shut down. And then these are a couple other of my stained glass pieces. So the one with the poppies is based on an Oriental poppy lamp. And then the peacock is part of a larger stained glass window of a peacock that was also done by Tiffany. And so I thought these were really interesting. And I was basically teaching myself to paint by doing these studies. And I'd done some painting back in my high school days, but I'd never been really serious about it because I'd been, so focused on doing animation. And so I kept doing these, and then eventually I began playing with the idea of creating my own stained glass designs. And one thing I really liked about the idea of painting stained glass as opposed to creating my own stained glass pieces was that I could control the light source, and I could always make it so that the light was exactly where I wanted it, exactly at the intensity I wanted it. And I thought that was really interesting. But I still wasn't really totally sold on just the idea of making my own stained glass designs. I was kind of still figuring that part out. And then around that time, I got a new iPhone, and I became a little bit addicted to my iPhone camera. And I began taking all these photos of what I saw as being stained glass out in the world. And I thought, this is really interesting. Like I can see, the way that the light is coming through here, and it looks like, the way it's wrapping around the trees is almost like the lead in a stained glass window, or the way it was lighting up leaves and flower petals. I thought that was really interesting. So this piece is my first attempt at combining stained glass with a landscape. And I thought, okay, this is where I want to go with this. And it was interesting. I was living in Vancouver, Canada at the time. So Vancouver has a climate that's more like Seattle for you Americans. It's very wet and it's very miserable a lot of the time of the year. So finding sunlight to shine through things can be a bit of a challenge. But thankfully, the year after I did this, we moved to Calgary. And Calgary is one of the sunniest cities in Canada. And so suddenly I had sun all over the place. And I was really inspired by what I was seeing. The painting on the left is based on a photo that someone I know took of a tornado. That this was an actual tornado that was just outside the city of Calgary, and him and his kids went out looking for it, and they shot this photo. And when I saw it on his Instagram feed, I just said, I have to paint that. Please let me paint that. And he ended up buying the painting afterwards. So that was really, really good. And then this other piece, snow has actually it's as a wheelchair user, it's really difficult, or was really difficult for me to get out in like the wet Vancouver snow. But snow in Calgary is much drier and finer, so I can still drive through it. So I just began taking all these photos of snow. And this snowfall in October was really interesting because I'd never seen fall leaves and snow before. And I thought that was just brilliant. The brilliance of the leaves and the purple shadows in the snow, I thought was wonderful. And then these are a couple more pieces. The Calgary, being on the prairies, it's all about big sky and big sunsets. And then the piece on the right, again, me not being able to get out in winter a lot of the times in Vancouver, I never saw what it was like when people were out in the snow. And so this is skating on the river downtown Calgary, which is wonderful. It was, I just thought it was absolutely magical. And the piece that's in the show, so this is Trusty Steed. This was interesting because this, again, was me just kind of being drawn to the light and taking an image of this beautiful sunset. And my wheelchair was there because we were sitting on the grass, and I hadn't really thought about it being in the frame. And I actually at one point, was trying to frame it out, but I was like, well, I'll just leave it in. It's kind of interesting to the shot. And then, of course, I went and tried to paint it. And all of a sudden, I was painting this really complicated wheelchair. But I found it interesting because in researching afterwards, wheelchairs in art, wheelchairs have such a very strong emotional charge in a lot of the art that you see that has them. It's either someone feeling very trapped by their chair, very confined by it, or there's a lot of images that I saw with people rising out of their wheelchairs in sort of an inspirational fashion. And for me, the wheelchair is it's a trusty steed. It's my vehicle. It's how I get around, and it's the key to my freedom. And so I wanted to be able to convey that. And it made me realize that there was kind of this hole in what I saw the art experience for people with disabilities, of just what's an ordinary life? What's an ordinary disabled life look like? And so that's the current body of work that I am working on right now, which is around depicting this ordinary disabled life. This includes my husband and our dogs. This is a painting of our puppy when she was about 12 weeks old, and our other dog, and just, painting our life and just showing it, the wheelchair is there. it has a, it has a role and it has an impact, but it's not the center of our lives, and it's certainly not the thing that makes our life any more or less extraordinary. So yeah, this is what I'm working on now and what I'm really excited about in terms of moving forward. So, any questions? I'll stop sharing.
That was wonderful, Athena. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. It was really interesting. It's not something I think a lot of people think about, like how much more difficult the snow would be in Vancouver versus Calgary and things like that. And it is so fascinating how you're bringing that into your art, how you're bringing your life into your art. Not just that, but I mean, how you're bringing your life into your art in a really beautiful, light-filled way. It's really wonderful. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
I do. I thought it was so remarkable, your use of light and shadow in it as a photographer. It's I felt like you have such a strong concept of light and shadow in all of the things. Like I think of your snow ones in particular. It's just phenomenal. But what I was going to ask you though was when you were first getting into acrylic paint, is that something that you did previous to animating and then you just did it more afterwards? It was just picked up right afterwards?
I did some, like I took, high school painting classes, and that was sort of the extent of my exposure to painting. What's really interesting is that I've since studied to be a therapeutic arts practitioner. And what I've learned is that working with a wet material versus a dry material, and I think working on the computer could be considered a dry material, it impacts your brain in a different way. And so what I basically landed on was I needed to change out of the medium that I was using before into something different. And that was part of my creative healing process. So it was very much kind of finding that piece in order to sort of move forward with my own creativity.
I love it. Thank you for sharing.
That is really fascinating. I mean, it makes sense, but that's such a fascinating thought. I haven't, in terms of things like art therapy, I haven't really even heard that before. Thank you for sharing.
The paint, it works with the limbic area of your brain, which is more the emotional core, and dry materials are more in the sort of frontal lobe, more the cognitive area. So it is very fascinating.
Really fascinating. I love hearing that. In the chat, Meredith said, beautiful work. Elizabeth said, thank you, wonderful story. And Erica said, thank you for sharing your journey. I wanted to share that as well. I agree. This has been wonderful, Athena. Does anybody else have any questions or comments for Athena before we move on? Well, thank you so much for sharing. It was wonderful to see your art come in for this Audacity show. I think it's artwork that makes so much sense for this show, but it's approaching it in a very different way than a lot of other artists. And it was really cool to see it. And it's so cool to have your story added. Oh, Meredith said, are you on social media, Athena?
Yes, I am. I'm at Athena Creative on Instagram.
Awesome. All right. Everyone should go and follow you. And if you haven't seen her piece, Trusty Steed, in the show yet, definitely go and see it. That is such a strong and beautiful piece. There's a whole story in it. And I think it's just so wonderful of you to share it with us. Thank you. All right. Well, next up, we have Alisa McRonald. And for Alisa, I'm going to read your bio. I also want to read your answer to the question for the concept of self-taught artist. I thought that was really interesting to hear what you're doing with your materials and even your tools. So I know we're probably going to see some more of that since we'll be able to tour. We're going to do a tour of your studio, but I wanted to read it anyway. So, okay. Alisa's bio. Alisa McRonald's woven weirdos live in the ironic pop culture paradise of a queer Gen X feminist. Her work is a tactile fruit salad with a soup con of the esoteric. Her work has been featured in publications such as the New York Times, Harper's Bazaar Japan, Nylon Magazine, and Giant Robot Magazine. She was awarded the 2020 Best of Craft and Design Award from the Toronto Outdoor Art Fair and has been featured in many curatorial lists. And the question was about what the concept of self-taught means to the artist. And if you haven't been to the exhibition, there were a few questions we asked the artist, and we posted one or two of the questions in each of their bio sections with the artwork. So I would encourage you to go and read them. They're really fascinating, and it's wonderful everything that these artists have shared with us. But I do want to read this one. It is about the concept of self-taught and what it means to the artist. I have always lived in the 90s DIY culture ethos, both out of necessity and a belief in it. There are so many items around us that can be used to make art, and art making tools with very little impact on the environment. Reusing, making it myself, and trading skills and goods with others is how I was raised and what I bring to my artistic practice. Since I started exploring textile art, I have made my own looms and frames out of found materials. In sourcing raw materials, I turn to thrift stores and knitters with bins of leftover project yarn. I make my own yarn out of t-shirts and other discarded textiles. The whole process for me, from making the tools, creating the necessary materials, right through to the finished product, encompasses my creative process. I thought that was really interesting, and I'm excited to hear from you, Alisa. I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, I think we've lost the sound. Here, let me see.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep,
Yeah.
you're back.
Okay, great. So thank you so much to Katie and to Roaring Artists Gallery. This is such a wonderful experience, and to my other fellow artists today, Athena and Jill. Athena, your talk was wonderful, and I can't wait to hear from Jill. So I am in my studio today, and I live in Guelph, Ontario, which is about an hour's drive from Toronto, except not at rush hour. So, and my studio is totally full right now. And so I thought it would be fun to show you around and talk about my process. I'm preparing for a few shows, and it's not usually this full. So let me just start. I have, I'm going to be holding my thing, my phone, and I'll keep switching back and forth to the selfie view and then the back camera. So what I usually start out with is watercolor. I find watercolor for me in planning textile art really helpful. I like building the colors and working with the different irregular shapes. And so I spend a lot of time sketching out and planning my pieces in this way. So that is sort of the first thing, my first steps. And I'm going to take you through my weaving process. So here is, hold on one second. Yes. Okay, I'm going to take you through my weaving process. So I have a few looms in my studio. The first one I'm going to show you is for much bigger pieces. So for me, a loom is just two horizontal sticks or pieces with a warp between them. So these are, you can see, quite big, so I can do quite big pieces, and they're just made out of like electrical tubing, and I have them stuck to the wall with these little hooks. And so for me, this is like a nice, compact, easy way to do really big weavings. And to talk about my process, I will switch to this loom. So this again is just a loom. It's an old frame that an artist, a painter would stretch canvas over. And I have it on my, on an easel here. And so my first step is drawing the image that I'm going to be weaving on a piece of paper. It's called a cartoon. And you can see behind the warp here. And I just tape it to the back of my loom, and then I have the image that I can follow. So this one is a motif that I use regularly. It's a cat, and it is made out of reclaimed t-shirts, which I get from thrift stores or people just give me. There's a way of cutting them up that make a continuous ball of yarn. And if you want to know that, it's on the internet, just a tutorial, Google a tutorial on how to make t-shirt yarn. And it's really great because then there's a nice big ball of yarn. And I really enjoy sort of doing tone on tone to create depth and gradation. A lot of times, so the bulk of this one is gray. So I have several different t-shirts. And so I sort of mix the different grays together so that I can bring them throughout. I always use a hemp warp. So it's a nice sturdy warp because these can also tend to get very heavy, especially the bigger ones, which can get very heavy. The bigger ones use close to 60 or more t-shirts. And these small ones, which there's this one that I'm working on. And then I have these two, this one here. And this one here. I started making them smaller so that I could use up sort of every last scrap of t-shirt yarn. And so when I'm done, I take them off the loom and I back them with reclaimed fabric, usually sheets. Or a yardage that I pick up at thrift stores. So that's my weaving process. The next thing, the other medium that I use a lot is punch needle, which is a rug hooking technique or a rug making technique, but can also be used in embroidery, depending on the size of the needle you work with and the yarn that you work with. So again, I get all of my yarn either from knitters who have made a garment or something and have a little tiny bit left that they want to get rid of, they give it to me, or I'll often as well just go to thrift stores and pick up bags of yarn in the colors that I need for the project. So right now, I have this big loom full of pieces. So what it is a frame built out of 2x4s. And then there's this carpet tacking grippers sort of around the perimeter of it so that I can stretch this burlap on top of it and get it nice and taut so that I can work on the pieces. This loom, as you can see, is quite big, and I would not do more than 6 pieces at a time. I would either do one big one or 2 or 3 smaller ones, and again, maximum 6. So I have 6 on here right now, and they're sort of my smaller pieces. And this is a punch needle. So the yarn runs through this tool from the ball, and then it goes through a little eye at the end. You work from the back of the piece, and you're just punching it through. And on the opposite side, on the right side, it gives these really beautiful textural loops. So this is a piece that's actually in the show. It's called the Cat. And this is one that's also in the show called the Princess. So both of them were done on this loom. And again, I work from the back. The front's nice and loopy, and then I sew a backing on them to finish them. Now, if I was going to be using these for rugs, I would have to put a glue on the back of it, which helps stabilize the yarn. But since most of the things I do are for hanging, I don't do that because I like that it stays nice and soft and pliable. Then I organize all of my yarns so you can see along here. There I have bins, and back here I have bins. And so I arrange my yarn by color. It's just easier for me. The weight doesn't matter so much in doing this technique. Here are some other pieces, smaller pieces. You know, when you take them off the loom, I use a like a knitting needle, and you go around the shape and make sure that all the loops are sort of in the shape that they need to be in. So you can kind of really define things that way. And it just helps make the shapes a little more crisp. And I tend to leave the back. People sometimes will punch all of the hanging yarns back through to the front, but you don't need to do that. And as you can see, you can pull on this and it won't come unraveled. It's really the back. If I pulled from the back, it would come unraveled. So this is totally ready to go, and very easy to hang. Sort of the last piece of equipment that I use a lot is this frame, which I didn't make, but it's very helpful because it's also very, very portable. There's this paddle that you sit on, and then these are the prickly sort of grippers. Then you can stretch your fabric over, and then I punch needle these guys, which are smaller faces. These are sort of the smallest pieces that I do that are easy for people to pick up if they don't want a big piece and they just want to invest in something smaller. And so with these, again, I sew the scrap fabric on the back and always put a hanger so that they're just ready to hang. They're meant to hang on the wall. And that's what I do with those guys. And here's a few more of them. And so those are fun. I did a set for Valentine's Day, and they had hearts on them. So so that's my studio, and I'll do one last little rotation around. It's a small space, but I'm located in a bigger office space. So out beyond the doors, there's like a nice kitchen and people talking. So it's nice. It's also nice. I really love being downtown and having the energy of other people doing creative things around me. So I will just do one last little scan, and then if anyone has any questions, I would love to answer them. That's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. That was wonderful. Oh, that was so cool to see. And some of these things are things I've done, but I've never seen them done the way that you do them. And it's really, really cool to see that. How you're making these giant pieces. I mean, they are fairly large pieces, especially for fiber pieces. in a small space. That's really inspiring to see. Thank you for sharing about that. Let's see, Erica and Athena both said, so cool, very cool. Meredith said, my question, do you find it annoying when people need to make a distinction between fine art and craft? That's an excellent question.
So yeah, I used to. I used to find it really annoying and kind of want to fight back and be like, well, what really is the difference? But right now, in my career, I feel kind of like both, and I like kind of riding that line. So yeah, right now I know I don't find it annoying anymore. I'm at peace with it. It's hard sometimes when you like so strongly, especially when I was younger, like wanted to identify like I'm an artist, I'm a fine artist, I'm a visual artist, and people always wanted to say, well, no, what you do is craft, it's craft, it's craft, to fight against that. But now I just embrace it.
That's awesome to hear. We have a lot of fiber art in my gallery, and it's so interesting to hear different artists' takes. One of the reasons we have a bunch of fiber art in my gallery is because I'm so passionate about that question, right? Does it even matter? Because I feel like the use of the word craft for many, many years was a gatekeeping mechanism, especially for women artists. And to say they were not fine artists because what they were doing wasn't, but it's pretty impressive what you can do with craft. So I kind of love how I feel like that word is being reclaimed in a way. And that's a really exciting thing to me. Let's see, Elizabeth asked where you get your inspiration.
So I think most of it comes from weird like 70s craft magazines and illustration. I really love looking at illustrations in children's book, like mostly from the 60s and 70s, where they're printed a little bit off center, and so you see the bleed and stuff. I just love that blocky, and textile design too, fabric design. So just the blocks of color and having them be sort of abstract, but if you can see the overall image as well if you go close, especially on fabric with repeated designs in fabric. It can be like standing far back and you see just like a beautiful design, or you can go close and you can see the individual elements of it. So I would say mostly from that, and from, again, talking about crafts that women did. My mom and my grandmother did a lot of embroidery and crochet and stuff. So all those kind of colors and textures inspire me as well.
Erica asked, from my research, or she said, from my research, the distinction was a patriarchal invention. Men were artists, women were craftspeople. That time has passed, I hope. I think that the more that women are doing these really cool things like Alyssa is doing, I mean, women have been doing really cool things with craft for years and years and years. And I think people are starting to see that a bit more right now. I know from the gallery perspective, a lot of galleries are still reticent to have things that could be labeled as craft in their galleries. And I think that that is a really sad thing because it brings so much. The stories that come from these amazing things, and really, a lot of them are matriarchal stories, like you said, what things that your mom and your grandmother did and how that's inspired you. And that's a really beautiful thing. I think we're reclaiming our history in a lot of ways with that. I love that. Thank you for saying that, Erica. And Jill asked, what was your pull to work with fiber? I think you've answered that a little bit in that, but I'd love to hear a few more.
It's something that's always resonated with me. Again, like my mom taught me how to sew when I was really young, and crochet, and we always just did these kinds of crafts together, and I felt like it really resonated with me. And as I got older and I in high school and stuff like that, trying to paint, and it never had the same feel. And I think I rebelled against using it as a material for that reason, that whole craft fine art debate. You want, again, being taken seriously, and then just all the things you can do. Like in the past did a lot of installation work and sculptural work, but all out of like found fabrics and stuff. So it really is such an expansive and wide medium. Like you can do so much with it. And that's what I love about it.
It was very cool to hear about that idea of how it has such a minimal impact on the environment as well. I know that's something that a lot of artists, especially those of us who use acrylics and things like that, these are things we have to think about. And it's really cool to see what you're doing with it and how art can be less environmentally invasive, I guess is probably a good way of putting it. It's a really interesting thing and it makes you think a lot. Does anybody else have any questions? Or Meredith asked if you're on Instagram.
I am at Alisa McRonald, just my name.
Awesome. Elizabeth said it's inspiring. I thought so too. This is really exciting. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? If not, we'll move forward to Jill. But Alisa, thank you so much for sharing. This was really fascinating and really cool. Thanks. All right.
Hi.
Hi. I will read your bio, Jill, and then sorry, my computer is running super slowly. Hopefully I'm not ending up with connection issues. All right. Here we go. Jill Nicole Luton has a BS in psychology and is a self-taught artist. She began her journey into photography during the 2008 recession to add a bright spot to her life during a stint of unemployment. After a time working as a photographer for hire, she shifted her focus to the therapeutic act of art making. With the use of self-portraiture as well as daily observations, her work primarily focuses on concepts in mental health and the actions of mothering. She lives with her husband and 2 children in Wichita, Kansas. All right, Jill, I'm so excited to hear from you. We've had Jill's work in the gallery before. We had a really beautiful exhibition that was sort of surrounding the themes of mental health last summer, and we were able to have Jill's work for that, some really beautiful floral images. And I'm so excited to have you back, Jill. So, all right, I will hand it over to you, and I'm excited to see what you have to say.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not super tech savvy, so I'm going to attempt the screen. Okay, let's share. Hi. I am Jill Nicole Luton. Thank you, Katie, for inviting me. And it was such a thrill to get to hear from the other artists as well, because I never get tired of hearing other artists talk about their work. I could have when it's question time, I think I could ask 20 questions. So I just left it to 2, 1 for each of you. Okay, let's see here. Okay, a super brief backstory. I was born and raised in Wichita, Kansas. I was always very, very interested in art, but I really was super involved in music all throughout my early years, high school, and then throughout college too. But when I moved to North Carolina with my husband for him to get his graduate degree, it was right during the recession, and I could not find a job to save my life. So I started working for a temp agency. And the first job that I had at the temp agency, I had a lot of downtime, and I had decided that I was going to teach myself photography and start a food blog. And that is exactly what I did. And so from there, I thought the only natural progression I knew in my mind was to start a photography business. And so that's when I started shooting weddings, newborns, families, and then even some commercial work in later years. But everything changed when I became a mother. Those are my 2 daughters. I really became unsatisfied with my photography business. And one, in part, I started my photography business in North Carolina, and then I moved to Kansas, and I basically had to start from scratch, and it proved to be pretty challenging. But more than that, motherhood just shifted how much energy I had to give to other people in that way. And so I started to shoot more for myself. And in those early years, I really just started documenting my life and what it looked like in early motherhood. The thing with motherhood is that I always knew I wanted to be a mother. It was very important to me. But I did not naturally fall into motherhood the way that I thought I would. I became, and some people would call it postpartum. That was definitely part of it. A lot of it was childhood trauma that was coming to the surface that I wasn't remembering. I became very unwell. And to be brief, I fell apart. I was fortunate to have found a therapist who really was able to communicate with me how to find myself again. And so in the mix of having found this amazing therapist, I also was invited to do these self-portraits for self-care with a friend of mine, Shay Linder. I actually don't know how to say her last name because I've only called her Shay, but she had, it was called Self-Portraits for Self-Care. And it was a year-long process, one self-portrait for every week. And some of them had prompts, some of them were like free skate and you could do whatever you want. And that's some of the imagery that you're seeing at the bottom is the images taken during the self-portraits for self-care. I have some more on the other slide. What I loved about these self-portraits is that sometimes you would have the prompt and you would immediately come up with an idea. And then sometimes you would get to be like curious about something, make it, and then in both of those settings, you would write about it. And so it would uncover so much that was going on underneath. So it was that mixed with therapy allowed me to see me again. I think I had gotten pretty lost in trauma and depression and anxiety, and to be able to like even see myself in the imagery was foundational for my growth. So here's a couple more. It is this project though that really kickstarted this idea of approaching photography more from an artistic standpoint. Instead of beforehand, it was always more business. It had to be for somebody else. It couldn't just be for me. And so this allowed it to be mine. Another project that I had going on during this time frame is I call Observations in Childhood. Back in 2017, I taught myself how to shoot on film. I had always wanted to shoot on film, but was always very, very intimidated by it. During this time is when I began this project. But before then, I was kind of influenced by the Project 365, when you shoot a picture a day for a year. I never finished that project, but it got me used to having my camera around me. I actually have a camera like I always have one near me. And it got me used to having it almost just became like another limb. And so the aesthetic of film mixed with the candid shots of my children living their life was like the perfect combination of nostalgia that I was looking for. When taking the images, it was almost a grounding exercise. Like the pictures that you see right now, this would kind of be in the height of a lot of my emotional and mental turmoil, like, you know, which is kind of comical when you think about it. You've got these bright, happy colors and imagery, but at the time it was like I was just drudging through the mud. And having the camera, especially a film camera, because you can't see what you're like, you can't see the final product at the end. Or I mean, you know, not in the moment. And you have to slow down, think about how much light do I have? What do I need to set? Like, there's no like easy getting through it. Like, you really have to stop and like experience your world. And so that was a grounding exercise in the moment, but even having the lens to my eye, almost gave space between me and the moment, and allowed it to almost make it feel like I was a child again too. So like it almost feels like this back and forth between being the mother in that situation and being a child with them. So here are some more images from that. Okay, well, and Katie kind of introduced this series in her introduction of me. This is my Mother Flower series, and this was what was in the show last year about mental health. I had like this amazing opportunity to go to the botanical gardens in my city and take as many flowers as I wanted. It was one of the best days of my life. And I had this project in my mind where I wanted to make this like dreamscape of flowers and all of this imagery, because a lot of times in my therapy sessions, we will use somatic therapy, like going places in your mind. And flowers are a huge resource for me and my well-being. And what I have realized in this project is that not only are flowers important to me, they represent a mother figure for me. You know, we can have mother figures all around us. Some people are very connected to the moon. Some people are really connected to flowers like me, trees, sunrises, sunsets. I mean, there could be a litany of, you know, TV mom characters. It doesn't really matter what it is. But basically, there's so many more mothers out there than just our literal ones. And these are what that has become for me. And in the shooting of this series, I didn't know that when I was making this. I was making them because the original idea in my mind didn't go out quite the way that I wanted to, but I had all of these amazing flowers that I couldn't let just die. I had to capture them. And so I just decided to take them one by one and, you know, capture them in their most ideal form. And what I realized is that I was kind of, well, I started talking to them and like, you know, moving them around as if they were people, and getting the images back. I realized like how much these flowers actually mean to me. So that is that series. And then this is my series that has no name. I don't know. In the self-portrait that I spoke of earlier, I had a lot of them that involved my girls with me. I was really inspired by Mary Cassatt and just some of the, I mean, that's the one that comes to mind. There's so many out there of images of mothers and children, but there's something that just drew me into those kind of formal portraits. And I loved those images. But I was seeking something else to it, and I wasn't exactly sure what it was until I started kind of playing around with layering of imagery on top of each other. So you have this black and white self-portrait, and then these are film shots of flowers that I took just, you know, as I wanted to, not knowing their purpose. And I began to layer these together. And this is kind of that perfect analogy of like fake it till you make it kind of thing. These ended up representing to me the hope I was looking for and who I wanted to be as a mother. Like this being to grow into this hopeful, beautiful thing. Because at that time, it didn't feel hopeful or beautiful to me. You know, it only felt like darkness and difficulty and feeling like a failure on my end. And so what these gave me were like a visual representation of where I wanted to go. And what's so great about it is that these have been ongoing for 4 years. So I feel like as I am creating these, that I'm starting to live into them more. And the one that is Us on the Couch is the most recent one. I definitely had to bribe them with candy to get them to do it with me. But you know what? They know what it's for. And they're actually very excited to get to be a part of my process, which excites me too. I want them to want to do it. I've told them though before, while I will give you candy, I don't want you to feel like you have to do this. So I like that they choose to be a part of my art practice with me. So yeah, okay. And then these are just a couple of the shots when I was telling you about when I was trying to make this world of this otherworldly flower land. And that wasn't working out. So I decided to just kind of play around with shadows and light. And this was experimental film, which I love because there's a lot of control that gets taken out of it. You don't know how the color is going to cast. You don't really know what's going to stand out. And I like having part of the control taken away because I think it makes really interesting work. And then an evening occasion has to do with my love of taking a bath. I love taking baths. I take a bath probably 4 to 5 times a week. I love them. I wait until my kids go to bed. And it is probably my go-to exercise for self-mothering. It just feels good. And I thought it would be really interesting to document self-care. And so I'm starting with baths because I think it's my number one, but I'm very curious to be able to envision ways of having self-care taken into the frame. You know, this one kind of feels more intimate, like there's the reflection in the drain. There's obviously the view from where I sit. There's the bubbles in the water. And I like to me, I like that it's a bath, but it's non-literal. It's has some vagueness to it where you can kind of take it a little bit where you want to. And then this is a continuation of that. And I'm a big fan of slow shutter and what it can give a person. It feels almost ghost-like, which just has this melting sensation, and it just does good things for me. And then lastly, I included this in it because the work on with the lamp and everything like that is in the show. I got COVID right before Christmas and I was quarantined for 10 days. So my Christmas was by myself in my room, and my cameras, which I was happy to have them. And I, once I actually didn't feel terrible, I got to really have a lot of time to kind of play around and see what I could come up with. And, you know, curious about movement or, you know, shadows or, you know, multiple exposures of this kind of passing of time and waiting for this COVID to be over with. So I had a lot of fun with this, even though it was, I think you're not supposed to like having COVID, but like I had a lot of fun this part. And then lastly, this is where you can find me at. These are just some images I took during quarantine. And yeah, so that's the bulk of it.
Thank you, Jill. That was really cool to see how you've gone from the beginning and getting started in photography to where you are now. Meredith said the self-portrait images are so powerful. I absolutely agree. And Athena said she loves it. She's also a very dedicated bath person. I think I am not. And I wish that I could be more of a bath person. But those images are just beautiful. Erica said beautiful photos. Thank you. And yeah, I agree. Meredith said, thank you, and Athena too, for showing us your personal evolution with your art evolution. I think that's an excellent way of putting that. That's, Alyssa said, very beautiful. Yes, to documenting self-care. I'm excited to see what you do with that. I love the bath photos, but I'm excited to see how that grows. I know that self-care as a concept has become much more of a, well, it's become a bigger concept, I guess, within motherhood, as we start to realize that mothers are humans and we need to take care of ourselves if we're going to take care of all of these other little people. But it looks so different for everyone. And
I
I'm
also love
excited
the
to
word
see.
self-mothering in that.
Mhm.
I think sometimes like self-care gets diluted into like getting a pedicure or something like that. And so when you take it into self-mothering of like, what would you do for someone else and do, but towards yourself, I think it really shifts how you approach it. And so
I agree.
I use
That's a great
those
point.
back and forth, but essentially they're the same act, but self-mothering kind of gives you like a different way in.
It does. And I think that also does a really good job of explaining why going to the grocery store by yourself is not self-care. Like, would you do that for your kid? Would you be like, all right, go to the grocery store to take care of you? You're having a hard time. Go to the grocery store. No, you wouldn't. That's an excellent distinction. I love that. Thank you, Jill.
Katie, can I?
Yes, absolutely. Go for it, Elizabeth.
I think you're on mute, I'm afraid.
Oh.
How about now? Is that
You're
better?
good. Yeah.
That was wonderful, Jill. Jill and I met in a crit group with Mindy Sue Widdock. So we go way back together, but that was a great presentation. And what I was wanted to comment about was this idea of part of the control was taken away from you. So limiting the choices was it's just a great idea that we never think about, because we have to have all these possibilities, but shutting it down a little bit is quite helpful.
And it's part of the reason why I like film so much. Like you can have an idea in your head and you can, approach it with all the information that you have, but you don't know what you get until the end.
Yeah.
You don't, until that film is developed and you get it back, you don't know for sure what you're going to get. And I love having a little bit of that control taken out of it, because I think it removes that tendency to have like perfectionistic qualities where you want to like nitpick and like, oh, well, that wasn't quite the, I want to move over an inch, or, whatever that may be. And I don't think there's necessarily something wrong with that on a whole, but for me and the process and why I'm entering into it, it does good things for me to remove that.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I think if we get too nitpicky, the process slows down to such a crawl that you really lose any spontaneous thought. And I also love the self-mothering. It's just not a concept that I grew up with. And yet, I really would like to do some of that. So please proceed with that project. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Elizabeth. All right. Well, does anybody else have any questions? I love that you mentioned how you feel about film. So I got my start in photography. I went to art school with a focus in photography. And whenever we first started with film work, I actually chose my program based on the fact that they had a film lab and everything. When I first started in it, I hated it. It was like, I have no control at all. And the more that I did it, I had this one view camera in particular, and it was so loose. You couldn't secure it to where like you just had no idea what was going to happen ever with that thing. And at first I hated it so much. I did some of my best work on that view camera. And it was because of that. Like the things that happen whenever you give up some of that control is a really beautiful thing. I think that it's one of the ways you can really tell the difference between film. There's so much we can do in post-processing to make things look like film, but you can't get that same sort of emotional feel with digital that you can with film a lot of times. It's really cool to see.
I agree. There's something about film that I just can't quite even put into words. I learned on digital, but film just has I always use the word nostalgia, but I don't think that totally encapsulates what I feel about it. But once I started my film work, I just haven't turned back since.
There's something kind of magical about film, about the physicality of taking it from this light sensitive material and turning it into a print. Like even if the lab is the one who's doing it, still it has a very magical type quality to it. And I think, yeah, I've mostly shot digital as well throughout my career whenever I was in photography, and it doesn't have quite the same feel in that way. Well, does anybody else have any questions or comments for Jill? Thank you so much, Jill. That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your journey. And thank you for taking that journey and turning it into these photographs that you're sharing with us. That is a huge gift to the world. And I'm so proud that we get to have it in our gallery. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here today. Everyone who was here with us, everyone who will be watching this later on in once it gets up onto YouTube, which should be in the next few days. I appreciate so much you coming to support these artists and supporting them afterwards as well. Follow them on Instagram, buy their work, and definitely if you have not seen the Audacity exhibition yet, come and see it. It's a really, really special exhibition, I think. It is curated by our guest juror, Marinley Martinez, and she did a really excellent job, I think, of taking this concept and turning it into a beautiful but also exciting show. So go and see it if you haven't yet on roaringartistgallery.com. It will be there for, let's see, I think until, is it June 31st? You would think I would have these dates before I do these things, but every single time. But it's such a wonderful exhibition in our 3D gallery space through May 31st, April 1st through May 31st. All right. Well, thank you all for being here again and for supporting us, and we'll see you next time. All right. Bye.